I didn't notice the first time he lied. That's what scares me most.
No slam doors. No whisper threats.
Just a detail I missed, and I can't stop replaying it. Just a missing detail in a quiet conversation. And what I discovered next still doesn't sit right with me, does it? Take a breath, hit subscribe, and tell me below. Where are you listening from right now? My name's Kara, I'm 34, and I live just outside Bloomington, Indiana. It's not a big town, but big enough that no one looks too closely at who you bring to dinner. Or who vanishes after. He said his name was Felipe. I met him at a local art walk, one of those spring weekend events downtown, where every coffee shop pretends it's a gallery and the air smells like acrylics and espresso. He stood too long in front of a painting of a window that didn't face anything. I asked what he saw in it. He said, loneliness, but also escape. I should have known from that. I really should have. At the time, I'd just come out of something with a man I now call the apologizer. The kind who hurts you weakly and thanks you for forgiving him before you've even processed what happened. Felipe felt different. Still water, not storm. He was quiet, observant. He asked questions. And when he smiled, it wasn't like he was performing it. It looked like he was listening to his own joke inside his head.
I like that.
I told myself that meant depth. We started seeing each other slowly. 3 weeks of casual meetups. Coffee, walks, thrift stores. Then, suddenly, one night he asked if I ever thought about how immigration works. I thought it was philosophical. He meant it literally. I overstayed my visa a year ago, he said, his voice low. I'm working, but
I'm afraid.
every knock at the door makes me think it's ICE. I remember the way the room felt after he said that. Not heavy.
Hollow.
Like something just left, or something just entered. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. I barely knew him. And yet, I felt his fear like it was my own. The first real red flag came a few days later, though I didn't call it that back then. He showed up at my apartment unannounced. No message. Just stood outside my complex with a paper bag of groceries, acting like it was romantic. I asked how he knew where I lived. He said I must have told him. I hadn't. I know I hadn't. But I smiled anyway and let him in. Inside the bag was instant coffee, 2 bananas, and a dented can of soup. It was all so strange, so minor, that I filed it under quirky and moved on. The next few months blurred. He didn't move in exactly, but he stopped going home. Or at least, I stopped seeing him leave. His things started showing up, first a toothbrush, then a drawer, then a battered external hard drive labeled only with F. He told me stories about his life in Brazil, about how his father left, his mother worked 3 jobs, how he wanted to be a writer. I never saw him write anything, but I believed him. He was convincing. Or maybe I was lonely. Probably both. Then came the night we were watching some courtroom drama, one of those shows with tense cross-examinations and legal monologues. And suddenly he asked, in a voice too casual, "What do you think about marrying someone to help them stay in the country?" I laughed at first. I thought he was joking. But he wasn't smiling. "I wouldn't ask you to do it," he said, his hand brushing my knee. "I'm just saying, some people see it as transactional. But others see it as fate giving you a test." A week later, he brought up marriage again. This time over dinner, with numbers. How much it would cost. What the process looked like. What paperwork he had already gathered. $4,100. That was the number he said would cover everything. Filing fees, legal consults, document translations, even the medical exam. He knew the process intimately. Too intimately, maybe. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I asked for a payment plan. But he didn't want a loan. He wanted a commitment. He said, "This isn't a transaction to me, Kara. This is love with logistics." And I fell for it. Not like a teenager in lust, but like a tired woman who wanted to believe this man needed her, not just her status, not just her name. The wedding was quiet. Civil. I wore a navy wrap dress I'd bought on clearance, and he wore a button-up that still had the store tag under the collar. We took photos outside the courthouse. In one, his smile is perfect. But the eyes don't match. I didn't notice until months later. We filed the paperwork. I paid every dollar. Every receipt was in my name. And just like that, I was a married woman with a ghost for a husband. Because the minute the documents went through, Felipe changed. He stopped helping around the house. He took calls outside. He changed his phone passcode. Once I saw a second email on his laptop. One I didn't recognize. When I asked about it, he said it was an old Gmail he used for junk. I nodded.
But something in me shifted that day.
I started keeping a log. At first, it was just weird behaviors. The way he'd freeze when I mentioned mutual friends. The way he'd ask if certain bills were in his name. The time he unplugged the Wi-Fi before leaving for work. But then things got darker. I got a call from my bank about a flagged purchase. $862 spent at an electronics store. When I checked the security footage, it was Felipe using my card. Calm as ever. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it.
He said he meant to tell me
that it was for us. That he was planning something for my birthday. He looked me dead in the eyes as he said it. My birthday was 3 months away. And still, I didn't leave. Because here's what they don't tell you about manipulation. It doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it flatters you. Sometimes it says, I chose you, and only you can fix me. And by the time you see the cage, you've already decorated it. It wasn't until the email from USCIS came, the one confirming his change of status had been finalized, that I realized something was off. The form had my name, his name, and a confirmation number. But it also showed a new address. Not mine. One I didn't recognize. I searched it. A shared condo across town. When I brought it up, he looked stunned for a split second. Then smiled. That must be a clerical error. He left that night for a walk. He never came back. Not to me. Not to the apartment.
Not to the marriage.
I waited.
Called.
Messaged. Nothing. 3 days later, the ring was in the mailbox, wrapped in a paper napkin, with no note. That's when I started putting the timeline together. Every receipt, every odd moment, every call, every login, every borrowed dollar. I posted it online. Not for sympathy, but to warn other women. I didn't expect what happened next. Because someone who knew immigration law, picked it up. And so did someone else.
I didn't sleep the night he left.
Not because I thought he might come back, but because I realized how easily he had made me believe he would. For 3 days, I watched our shared location on my phone, which, ironically, he'd turned on for safety. The dot blinked near the condo address from the USCIS form, then vanished. Phone off. Silence. I checked hospital logs. Nothing. Police stations. Nothing. And still, I cleaned his toothbrush from the bathroom like he was coming home. What finally snapped me out of it was my landlord. He stopped me in the hall and said, Hey, just so you know, your husband was asking if the lease was in your name or both. He said he was exploring options. Options.
That word haunted me.
The same day, I called to freeze our joint account. I'd added him back when we got married. He said it was just easier to manage groceries and rent together. By the time I called, it was already overdrawn. He'd used the debit card for 4 things the day before he disappeared. A Greyhound ticket to Chicago. A prepaid SIM card. A $6.99 burner phone from a gas station. And a hotel room. Just one night. The hotel clerk remembered him. Said he was polite, well-dressed, and alone. The next morning, I filed a report. Not a missing person, because that would be a lie. I told them the truth. That I believed I had been manipulated, defrauded, and used in a potentially criminal marriage scam. The woman behind the counter didn't blink. You'd be surprised how common this is, she said, flipping through a stack of forms. But it's hard to prove. Most victims don't have receipts. But I did. And I started organizing them like a crime board. Here's what I learned about Felipe once I stopped loving him. His real name wasn't Felipe. It was Diego Felipe Navarro. Born in Florianopolis. Multiple aliases used for short-term apartment rentals across 3 cities. 2 flagged immigration holds from 2017 and 2019, both dismissed after citizen-sponsor marriage filings. There was a pattern. I wasn't the first. I might not even have been the second. But I was the one who didn't delete the text logs. The one who had screenshots of every Venmo, every email confirmation, every receipt. I even had footage from my Ring doorbell of him bringing home a package he claimed was for work, which turned out to be a folder of forged documents. The last file on his external hard drive, the one labeled F, was a PDF titled Form I-130 packet. It had sections with fake addresses, fake tax info, and a Word doc labeled Kara Draft Story. It was a script, a narrative, about how we met. He had written it before we even started dating. That's when I posted the timeline. Not a blog. Not a dramatic tell-all. Just a spreadsheet with notes, images, dates. I added a short caption. If this has happened to you, contact me. If this is happening now, look at the patterns. At first, I thought it would be ignored. But within hours, a few local Reddit pages picked it up. Then an immigration law TikToker, someone who breaks down shady green card cases, shared it in a stitched video. 2 days later, my inbox exploded. There were stories from women in Missouri, Ohio, even one in upstate New York. Similar names, similar accents, similar tactics. One woman had married him under a different name, Luis DaCosta. Another said he lived with her for 5 months and disappeared after receiving conditional permanent resident status. I sent everything I had to the lawyer who'd contacted me through Reddit. She offered to help pro bono. Said she'd seen trafficking cases that started just like this, with someone charming, organized, and patient. Someone who knew how to study their marks. The word she used was pattern predator. But here's where the story shifts. Because about a week after I posted the timeline, I started noticing odd things. Not dramatic. Not even obviously threatening. Just strange. My Ring camera glitched twice during the same night. Once at 2:12 a.m., then again at 3:47 a.m. Both times, it cut out for exactly 38 seconds. When I checked the saved footage, there were jumpy moments, like someone had passed too fast to trigger motion, but not fast enough to be invisible. Then came the calls. Always from different numbers. Always silence on the line. When I said, "Hello," I could hear background sounds.
Cars passing.
A train. Once, even music. But no voice. One night I picked up and said nothing. The silence on the other end did the same. It lasted 43 seconds before the call dropped. I stopped walking to my car without holding my keys between my fingers. Then one evening, I noticed a folded piece of paper wedged into my mailbox. Not inside, just stuck in the lip, barely visible. It was a printout of our wedding photo. The one outside the courthouse. But someone had scribbled something over his face. Not a word. Just thick black ink. Swirled over and over until it tore through the paper. No note.
No sender.
I called the police. Filed another report. The officer said it could have been a prank. Could have been an ex. But his eyes changed when I told him about the immigration files. You should get a copy of your marriage license reissued, he said. And maybe a lock for your bedroom door. That night, I changed every password. Closed every shared account. Bought a second deadbolt. But I also started filming. Every time I left or entered my apartment, I recorded it. Every envelope. Every package. Every login. Because if he was watching, I wanted to leave breadcrumbs of my own. A week passed. Then 2. The lawyer filed a petition with USCIS to flag his permanent residency status. Attached every piece of evidence. She said it might not lead to deportation, especially if he disappeared, but it would initiate an investigation. And once that started, his name, real or not, would be in the system permanently. It was a quiet kind of justice. Paper thin. But it was something. Until I got an email from a burner address. philippanotphilippe@gmail.com. No subject. No text. Just a file. I opened it on a separate device, the way the lawyer advised. It was a video. Grainy. Black and white. Security cam footage.
Of me.
Walking into my own building. Carrying groceries. On the phone. Laughing.
No timestamp.
No location indicator. Just a loop of me, unaware, mundane, vulnerable. It lasted 9 minutes and 23 seconds. I stared at the screen long after it ended, wondering if it was real or if it had been edited. wondering who filmed it, wondering how long I had been watched and by whom. The horror wasn't the video.
It was the normalcy of it.
Because when fear starts to look like your everyday life, you stop knowing where the danger begins. That was the night I moved out. I didn't tell anyone except my sister. Packed what I could fit into my car and drove 2 towns over to a short-term rental I found on a private listing board. The apartment was plain, cheap, and secure. I paid in cash. No forwarding address. And that's where I started recording the podcast. Not for content. For safety. Because people listen. And people remember details. And if I ever disappeared, I wanted someone to know the sound of my voice when I was still in control. The first episode was simple. What I paid for and what he took. I didn't name names. Didn't accuse. Just told the story, piece by piece, with all the numbers. The $4,100. The hotel receipt. The burner phone. The legal file. The ink-smeared photo. By the 3rd episode, I had 9,000 downloads. Then 22,000. By the 5th, a national outlet reached out. And then I got a DM from someone with a blue checkmark and a bio that said, investigative reporter, specializing in immigration fraud and global ID rings. Her message was short. Kara, I think I've been looking for him for a long time. You're not just part of his story. You might be the last chapter. The reporter's name was Elise Morgan. She called from a block number and asked if I was in a safe place before we even exchanged pleasantries. That's how I knew she was serious. I'm going to ask you a question I already know the answer to, she said. Did he ever mention someone named Maribel? I froze. Because yes, he had. Only once. It was late, after wine, after a strange day when he was too quiet. He'd said, there was someone before you. Maribel. But it didn't work out. She didn't believe in the bigger picture. That was it. No last name. No photo. No story. Just a warning wrapped in nostalgia. Elise said Maribel was real. 37. From outside Toledo. Had married a man named Luis Diego Santos in 2021. Had gone silent in early 2022. Last seen withdrawing $5,400 in cash before vanishing. Her family filed a missing person report. It was quietly closed after she sent a typed letter from Chicago. No signature, no proof of life. The police suspected she'd left voluntarily. But Elise had doubts. So did I. She said there were 3 other women, scattered across 4 states, each with slightly different names for him. Felipe, Diego, Luis, even a Daniel. Each one had married him. Each one had paid thousands. And each time, he vanished just before the conditions for permanent residency lifted. He had a pattern, but also a timeline. It meant I had one too. The crimes were layered. Technically, what he'd done to me, marrying under false pretenses for immigration benefit, was marriage fraud, a federal offense. But proving intent to deceive was hard. The real weapon was the paper trail I had, especially the Kara draft story file. No one writes a romantic origin story in advance unless they're playing a role. No one files USCIS paperwork with a backup address unless they're planning an exit. Elise wanted to interview me on record. Said the Department of Homeland Security had an open case, but no active lead. She believed I could be the linchpin, the one with enough digital evidence to give the case momentum. I agreed. We met at a co-working space she rented in Indianapolis. Neutral ground.
Cameras on.
Lights soft. She didn't use makeup. Just a mic, a cup of coffee, and a worn-out notebook. For 2 hours, I told her everything. She barely blinked. Just took notes in looping cursive and nodded in that slow, aching way reporters do when they already know how the story ends. At the end, she handed me a copy of a DMV photo. Said, "This is the closest thing we have to his real face." It was him, but thinner, harder, and with eyes that had never smiled. After the interview aired, everything changed. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Some to offer support. Some to say I'd made it up. One woman, anonymous email, no name, said she hoped I was ready to be watched like you watched him. Another message came with an attachment, A screenshot of my current apartment's front door. The angle was slightly off, not from across the street but higher up, as if taken from a window. I filed a report. Again. Police came. Took statements. But there was no break-in. No physical threat. Just digital shadows, cold, lingering, legal in the thinnest ways. Still, I bought blackout curtains. Switched cars with my sister for a week. Got a new phone. But I didn't stop talking. Because silence is fear's reward, and speaking up is how I broke the script. The podcast hit 100,000 downloads in its 8th week. By then, I had a new setup.
Get meek.
2 softboxes. A script I barely followed. I didn't perform the story. I remembered it. I let the silences breathe. Let the rage be quiet. One episode was titled, "He Learned Me Before He Loved Me." Another, "Receipts Are My Religion Now." That one went viral. It caught the attention of a legal aid group in Chicago. They offered to represent me, not just as a victim of fraud, but as a whistleblower in a potential multi-state immigration scam. And still, even with all that momentum, there was one piece missing. Him. Until the burner email lit up again. Same address. philippanotphilippe@gmail.com. No subject. Just one line. "I didn't take your life. I borrowed it. You were safer before you looked." I stared at the screen until it blurred. Not from tears. From adrenaline. Because there was something calm about that message. Not defensive. Not remorseful. Just deliberate. I forwarded it to Elise and the legal team. The IP trace led to a public library in Evanston, Illinois. But he was long gone. Still, something clicked. Evanston was where one of the other women, one who had refused to file charges, had last used her debit card. 4 years ago. That library was 5 blocks from a language school. He wasn't just picking women. He was building them into scripts. And then came the night of the voicemail. I got home late, grocery bags in hand, cold air pressing against my cheeks. I saw no one. Not in the parking lot. Not in the stairwell. But when I unlocked the door, my phone buzzed. One missed call. One new voicemail. From an unknown number. I played it. Static at first. Then a voice. Muffled. Almost metallic. "I could have loved you, you know. If it had been real. If you hadn't made it a story." Click. That was it. 16 seconds. I played it 12 times. And on the 12th, I realized something. There was a faint hum behind the voice. A sound I'd heard before. A train. The same one that ran past my apartment every night at 9:14. He'd recorded it from here. From near enough to hear it live. I checked the camera. The building footage. My ring logs. Nothing. But the timestamp on the voicemail was 9:12 p.m. He had been close. And maybe he still was. The next day, Elise called again. She'd been contacted by someone at IC who had reviewed my case. Quietly. Off the record. They had a working theory. He was part of a small, loosely networked fraud ring that recruited men to target isolated or emotionally vulnerable women. Often in Midwestern towns. Often post-divorce. Often with a savior complex. They trained each other. Shared documents. Shared scripts. The Cara draft story wasn't just his idea. It was part of a template. A literal playbook. And now, I had become the page they didn't plan for. Because I kept everything. Because I spoke up. Because I didn't delete the footage or ignore the email or pretend the napkin-wrapped ring didn't feel like a curse. They asked if I'd be willing to testify if it came to that. I said yes. But inside, I was already planning the final episode. The one where I don't cry. The one where I don't narrate as a victim. The one where I say, "You took $4,100. You took my name. You took my story. But now everyone knows how it ends. And you don't get to rewrite it again." Some stories end in prison. Some in confessions. Mine ended in a Facebook Marketplace listing. I was scrolling one night, not for anything in particular, just insomnia-fueled curiosity. I clicked on a furniture post because the couch looked familiar. Not just familiar. Identical. Same distressed navy linen. Same scratch on the left armrest. It was mine. The one Felipe or Luis or Diego or whoever he was had talked me into buying from a liquidation sale during our moving-in phase. I hadn't seen it since he left. The listing was in Evanston. No seller name. Just a phone number, partially redacted. But the photos had EXIF data, geotags. One of them pinged from an apartment complex 5 blocks from the train station. The same station I'd heard in that voicemail. I sent the listing to Elise. She called it a breadcrumb. Ice called it a break. And I called it the first time I felt like I could breathe in months. They coordinated with local authorities. Quietly.
No dramatic ride. No flashing lights.
Just a knock on a door in a building that smelled like old paint and microwave dinners. He opened it. Went by the name Raphael. Had a different haircut, new glasses, and a girlfriend, 29, recently moved from North Carolina. She was holding a dog when the agents walked in. She had no idea who he really was. They didn't arrest him on the spot. They questioned him. He denied everything. Said I was unstable. Said I was obsessed. Said I'd fabricated the whole relationship and was trying to ruin his life because he moved on. That's when the USB came in. The one with all the files. Emails. Screenshots. The fake address he submitted. The script. The ring footage. The flagged purchases. The video of me he'd sent from a burner account. And the timeline. The one I built, date by date, with every horrifyingly normal moment marked like a breadcrumb trail through my own memory. They didn't arrest him that day. But 3 weeks later, he was gone. Not vanished this time. Detained. Flagged under multiple names. Held under marriage fraud and identity fraud suspicion.
No bail.
He didn't even try to call me. I didn't attend the preliminary hearing. But Elise did. She said he didn't look scared. Just neutral. Like someone watching a movie about a life he'd already forgotten. He pled not guilty. His lawyer tried to paint the picture of a cultural misunderstanding, of a man who got in too deep emotionally and lacked the resources to navigate U.S. bureaucracy. They called me conflicted, emotionally compromised, likely overinvested. That part almost broke me, until the prosecutors showed the fake names, and the file labeled Cara Draft Story, and the wedding photo with my ring blurred out, digitally erased in every single version. They said it demonstrated premeditated narrative control. And for the first time, I felt seen in a courtroom. The case is ongoing. Immigration holds. Federal charges pending. But I don't need to wait for a verdict anymore. Because the soft revenge already happened. It happened when the podcast crossed 500,000 downloads. When other women came forward. When someone from a fraud protection group emailed me to say they'd added scripted emotional grooming via immigration to their warning seminars and named my story as the example. It happened when his face showed up in a training presentation for ICE agents in Ohio. It happened when the girlfriend who had lived with him in Evanston, the one holding the dog, reached out to me through a burner Reddit account and said, "I left. Because of you. Thank you." I didn't even know who I was becoming. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just didn't want to disappear. There's something slow and beautiful about healing when no one's watching. About buying your own furniture again, piece by piece, and not needing someone else to carry the heavy end. I still check the windows at night. I still flinch when I see burner emails pop up. But I no longer feel like a plot twist. I feel like the narrator again. The podcast is now on hiatus. Not because I'm scared. Because I'm writing something new. A book, maybe. Or just a guide. Not on how to spot red flags, but on how to trust your gut even when it whispers instead of screams. On how to know that silence can be a tactic. That being watched doesn't always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like flattery, like devotion, like love with logistics. But you learn. And if you're lucky or angry enough, you turn the learning into evidence. You turn the hurt into structure. And you leave them one step short of erasing you. Sometimes I look at the courthouse photo. Not because I miss him, but because I like to zoom in on my own eyes. They weren't broken. They were sharp. Still are. And now, they know what to look for.